Morning, everyone. My name's Ben Mitchell. I'm a principal ecologist at Johns Associates, and we've been doing a number of projects for Eastleigh Borough Council over the last sort of 5-6 years, really. The most significant of which has been the One Horton Heath development with the likes of Lloyd, who you've heard from this morning. My job is quite different to the other ones that you've heard this morning. And my role really is one of those technical consultants that get brought in really to add our particular technical discipline into the mix as part of a design team. And there are many different flavors of ecology, and I'm only going to really talk about one today. But I really thought, as part of an introduction, that actually there are lots of different elements to ecology, from research. There's also a lot of very valuable conservation work that's done both in the UK and abroad. There's also ecology work for local authorities and statutory bodies. But the one that I'm going to talk to you about today is commercial ecology, and really the role of a consultant ecologist. So I had a bit of a hard think about this. What exactly is it that we do in a nutshell? And the answer I came up with is that we work with developers, and developers can be anyone really who is proposing to change the environment, to minimize the impacts of a development or whatever change needs to come about, and maximize the benefits for wildlife, which is a real challenge, really. Ultimately, you know, I see a consultant ecologist role as really representing for nature and the natural environment throughout this process. How on earth do we do that? Well, it is very similar to other technical disciplines, really, that first of all, we have to know what we're working with. And a large element of what we do is sort of technical ecology surveys, and that is quite literally everything from studying the plants and habitats themselves to the animals that then rely on those habitats, and also looking at the relative value of those habitats and trying really to get a feel for where the most sensitive elements of a development is and what the pathways are for those sensitivities. So is it air quality? Is it water quality? Is it pollution? Is it habitat loss? And we then capture that in a variety of technical reports that by and large get submitted to planning with planning applications. But also that we influence the design, and for us the hallmark of a good project is one which we are engaged in early in the process, because ultimately a lot of the potential impacts of any change to the environment can actually be avoided when you're involved early to design out, is what we call it, those impacts. And that process, again, as you've heard this morning, is about negotiation. It's actually about people as much as it's about the environment. And that's what makes this job so interesting and so challenging at the same time, is that you ultimately then need to, like I say, represent for the natural world, but with an understanding that change has to happen, and how you then negotiate what is the best position that marries up the aspirations of the other disciplines, landscape architects, planners, engineers, and also gets the best out of this development for nature. And how we do that is that we need to have a very detailed knowledge of wildlife law, and also local policies that regard nature, And all local authorities have a duty to have these kind of policies in place. And so we will look at a development, and we will look at meeting those policies. But it's our kind of overriding perspective that those policies are really just a benchmark, and that the development should really seek to do better than that. And that's where we start. So just to walk you through a kind of live example, and Horton Heath's obviously the most relevant here. This is the site here, within the red line boundary there in the centre. And so our investigations really start with exactly that. Where is the site? What's the context of the site? Wildlife and nature and animals don't really understand planning boundaries. They don't understand the sort of arbitrary boundaries that we put on the landscape. And so it's important to consider a site in that context, that it is a piece in a very large jigsaw, and animals will move across it, other animals will depend on it. And the context that it sits within the landscape is an important starting point. We'll then go on to site and have a look at the habitats that are present. So this is what's called the Phase 1 Habitat Survey. And you can see here that we have quite literally gone onto site and catalogued every habitat on site. And part of that is also about assessing the quality of those habitats on site. Some of them can be potentially very valuable habitats, but haven't been managed particularly well for diversity, for biodiversity. So we have to do an assessment like that. This is kind of the southern half of the site. And these TNs here are target notes, and they relate to specific notes that we've taken primarily on species or the presence of interesting features that we've found. And then what happens next is largely comes out of the habitats that are present. We look at those and we assess which ones of those are likely to support more valuable species. And my particular specialism is in bats. And so one of the elements that we did for the Horton Heath development was some radio tracking of bats, where we set up nets, we caught them under license from the government, and we attached a radio transmitter onto their backs. And we then used giant TV aerials and tracked them across Horton Heath, not only within the development site, but we tracked them wherever they went for a week. So it was difficult, it was challenging work. It was through the night. It was complicated, and there was an element of kind of guesswork to work out exactly where they were, and then we would pick the signal up again and track them through the estate and across the landscape. And so here's an example of the results from one female natterer's bat. This was a bat who was lactating, so she was feeding pups. And we tracked her across the landscape to try and work out where the valuable habitats were for her and for the other females that make up that colony. And what we found was that we found a number of important roosts actually on the east side of Horton Heath, and the bats were coming across into the One Horton Heath site through the woodlands there, through the existing housing, and feeding in the woodlands across there. So we identified that as being an important point to consider, that natterer's bats and other bats in those areas that you can see on this plan. And then how does that then actually influence the design? So what you can see here is the master plan. Now, the master plan, from a kind of planning perspective, or from an architectural perspective, has quite the opposite of this plan. So I'm interested in the non-grey areas, and they're primarily interested in the grey areas, and that's where our disciplines kind of combine to create something really quite special. And what you can see here is actually the habitats that we've designed. So we've looked at the existing habitats and how we can enhance those to be in much better condition and deliver priority habitats that the borough have identified as being important. And you can see those here. But of course, it's not just about the natural world. Ultimately, these are areas for people to play. They are areas for people to enjoy nature, and ultimately for for people to be inspired by nature and actually kind of stimulate the next generation of ecologists. So we always kind of perceive and try and conceive and design these things with that in mind, as it being just really quite a rich place for all creatures to exist. And how we actually then do that through the construction process. So this photo is not from Horton Heath. This is actually from a project that I'm managing up in Birmingham, where we've actually lifted a whole lot of heathland, which is a priority habitat, and we've had to move it, which is an entirely nerve-wracking process and very technical, because of the risks involved in terms of moving a habitat and having it die, even though, with the best intentions you were trying to keep it. So there was a lot of investigative work, soil sampling, to try and identify the right place to put it. And you can see a couple of my colleagues here actually putting the habitats into place, and it was quite literally a big jigsaw. 700 square meters of heathland jigsaw that we had to try and put back together. But it's been a great success. We're actually very proud of that one. Other elements of the work, these are photos that were taken yesterday. I was on a different construction site, and I was down at Horton Heath on Monday doing a similar process where buildings have to be demolished, and ultimately we are on site there as well to protect species as those things are actually happening. So I will be working with demolition contractors to quite literally pick through different parts of a building and take it apart extraordinarily delicately in order to protect bats. And these are a couple of common pipistrelles that you can see actually wedged in some of the brickwork. That was quite a nerve-wracking experience, but they both got away safe and well. So yes, it was a job well done. What are the fundamental skills of a professional ecologist? Well, you need an attention to detail. We are dealing with things that are microscopic, and we're dealing with things that are 300, 400-year oak trees, that you couldn't miss. So you need to notice these details. You do need to have a detailed knowledge of the natural world, and ultimately, a lot of changes happen with the best intentions, but have unintended side effects, and that's one of the most difficult things, to try and put a firm recommendation to somebody that will be the best outcome, even though there's so much variation in nature. Negotiation skills are key. As you've heard from some of my colleagues, we all negotiate with each other, ultimately with our conflicting priorities. And that's really where the magic happens, to be honest, when you come up with a good scheme, and you work with really qualified and very professional people to come out with that outcome. You need to have an open, critical mind. Things change in a heartbeat. You make one prediction or assumption about what's important or what an animal's going to do, and it changes. And so the most important thing for me, and what I say to more junior colleagues and trainees, is you just have to keep an open mind. You can't read a bit of guidance and assume that that's always going to be the case. And flexibility is essential. And in terms of future reading and about a career's sort of process really to go through, SAIM are fantastic. I'm a member of SAIM as our chartered institute, and they have a lot of really good guidance on how to get into ecology. And that, as my colleagues have said, get stuck in, get involved, go and volunteer, come down to Horton Heath, do a bit down there. There are no opportunities or bits of experience or time you can spend that won't be valuable in some way, and it may well be things that you do not expect.
What would you say is the most difficult thing about being an ecologist?
The most difficult thing, is trying to kind of find that balance, or kind of walk the tightrope between people and nature. A lot of the time you are working with people who, how should I phrase this, do not hold the same values that you do. And so you are basically, not at conflict, but you're at odds with other people's priorities, and that can be a real challenge. The other real challenge is that for other disciplines, actually things are really quite certain, but for us everything is massively fluid all the time. It changes with the seasons, and people don't, when people are trying to build a multi-million-pound project, they don't want to hear that you don't know the answer. And actually a lot of the time the answer is we don't know, but we know how to find out, or we know how to monitor it, or we can still deliver your process, but I don't have all the answers. That's quite difficult, but I think as you spend time in the saddle, actually you just get more confident in saying that, because acknowledging where you don't have a lot of confidence or where the risks are is actually the best you can do, and the rest is just nature.
And do you feel as though you do really make an impact, though? You do really make a difference as an ecologist?
Yes, I do. Sometimes it's quite difficult, I have to admit, that sometimes the differences feel small. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, my job is to kind of eke out those gains wherever they might be, and the skill for me is about trying to identify those elements that could just be tweaked, and all of a sudden you've got a nice bat roost, whereas before you just had some plain old timber cladding. Or could you change these species? Could you turn the site round just a little bit, and then you'd get a little bit more for wildlife here, and you'd avoid affecting those trees, So yes, I do. I do genuinely feel that. It's very easy to kind of adopt a different view on development, but the only way that you can change these things, or reduce the impact, or try and get these kind of wins for nature within the development process, is by being in the development process. And so you have to accept the fact that you are kind of fighting the fight for nature, and it can be quite exhausting, but it's worth it.
In terms of the route, you mentioned your chartered institute. How long might it take to become chartered?
It'll probably take, I would imagine, 3 to 5 years. There's different levels of membership as well. I'm the vice convener for the Southwest Members Group for SAIM, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of very keen, very interested people, and they're fantastic. They keep us professionals on our toes, and so there's many different levels. You can get in as a graduate member, and that gives you access to other opportunities to help you develop. One thing that SAIM does have is a very, very kind of clear, well-documented sort of process, a list of criteria that you have to kind of fulfill, and you can choose different competencies within that. So it depends on how hard you go at it and what opportunities you can take advantage of. But I would say maybe 3 to 5 years you could get into full membership.
And does everybody get there, kind of the position that you're in now, via university first, or do they come from a variety of pathways?
Again, it depends on the kind of flavour of ecology, to be honest. I work with some really good ecologists that have not been to university, that they have spent that time working vocationally on ecology, And in some areas of ecology, particularly commercial ecology, they're much better than I am. And that's why I bring them in to do stuff which they're better qualified to do, you know. And yet they've not got a degree. They've learned a lot, and they're equally as competent. I think when you're aiming to be a commercial consultant, you do have to then work a bit harder to try and kind of assure people about the kind of level. And I, I don't like to say that because I don't want to discredit any of my colleagues who don't have a degree, but it certainly is the normal route, is to get a degree. And one of the SIEM competencies, so basically the comparison is that either you do a degree or you need sort of 3 to 5 years worth of vocational experience is what they consider to be an equivalent. So yes, it's not the be all and end all. You can get there in different ways, but it's certainly very valuable, and it gives you those analytical skills.